So, namaskar friends and welcome once again to lecture number 21. In this lecture we are going to talk about a very important topic. The whole of the modern world is facing this kind of a situation. You talk to any individual and you will find that at some point in time they are under some kind of stress. Now, stress has emerged as one of the biggest problems of modern times, and the thing is we do not know a definite cure of stress. Now, we try to understand why do we get stress, what causes stress and how does it affect us, but do we really know what causes stress? If we know how to take control of that, if we know the genesis of it, probably we will be able to handle it. Sometimes we also say that it is a necessary evil to have, I mean we have got it automatically, this is in our system. So, stress is an integral part of our life. Why do we talk about soft skills when hard skills are there through which we can accomplish something, we can invent something, we have technical knowledge, we can run the machinery, we can do lot of things. But why soft skills are important? We call them life skills, because the quality of life is not determined by our proficiency in hard skills. There are certain skills that make life livable, and collectively we call them soft skills. It is through soft skills, it is through cultivation of soft skills we add quality to our life. We find the real meaning and substance in life. So, when stress is such a big problem in modern times, it is like it is spread like an epidemic. Nobody is spared from this stress. Anybody who is ambitious, anybody who is sensitive, anybody who wants to make something in his or her life has some kind of stress. Now, we need to understand what causes stress and whether our understanding of stress is proper. For proper understanding, we will refer to Indian knowledge framework. Till now, we have seen that Indian knowledge system has a different take on most of the soft skills that we have been taught till now. One thing by now is clear to us, that the Indian knowledge system always tries to look at the root cause. It wants to treat the root, not the stems, because if the root is fine, the stems will also be taken care of. So, let us begin, friends. What is stress? Is it an external condition or is it an inner condition? So, when we look at it from the Indian perspective, we find that it is not caused by external factors, it is something that is inner. Stress is often described as something caused by the world, deadlines, competition, expectations, uncertainty. We always keep talking a lot about them. Oh, my boss has told me to accomplish this, now I am in stress. Oh, I have to meet this deadline within this period of time, I am stressed. Well, so stress is defined in terms of deadlines, competition, expectations, uncertainty. But is this view really complete? I believe this view is not entirely wrong, but certainly it is incomplete. Stress is not only caused by external factors, it is also caused by the inner rhythm of our life, our thoughts, our mentality, our basic character. If stress were purely external, then similar conditions should produce similar responses in everyone, but it does not happen. We all get stressed differently and we all tackle stress differently. So, the lived experience repeatedly contradicts this assumption that stress is caused by the same thing to all the people in equal measure. No. So, it is not simply an event, it is an interpretation. So, it is certainly affected a lot by the way we perceive a situation, the way we interpret it, the way we respond to it. You may have seen there are people who accomplish a lot, but never look in any kind of stress. On the other hand, there are people whose outputs are very meager, still they always look overworked or stressed. So, this compels us to think that this is not determined by external events or external circumstances alone, there is something deeper than that. Indian philosophical traditions make a decisive move here. They relocate the source of disturbance from the world, that is bahya, external world, to the mind, that is antahkaran or chit. So, they believe that the turmoil that we see outside is but a manifestation of our inner disturbance. In the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, the mind is not a passive receiver, but an active constructor of experience. So, mental fluctuations, friends, the other day we talked about yoga. What is yoga? Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. What is yoga? Yoga is controlling the chanchal chit, the fluctuations of our mind, the mental fluctuations. So, our mind is mental fluctuations or chitta vritti continuously shape how reality is perceived. So, the mental disturbance certainly distorts the way we perceive things. The mental equilibrium certainly helps us look at a thing with lot of composure. So, stress therefore is not just reaction, it is constructed agitation, agitation of our mind. So, the phrase living life the wrong way, a lot of people say that you are living life the wrong way and that is the reason you are getting stressed. It is rhetorically striking, but philosophically imprecise. It assumes a fixed universal standard of right living. A lot of people will give you pieces of advice, you do this, you live like this, believing that there is a fixed remedy for everybody, but that is not true. We all cultivate our own standards. There is nothing called universal standard of right living. So, Indian traditions generally resist this kind of universalization. What they offer instead is a more diagnostic insight. Stress signals a misalignment between how we live and how we understand ourselves, our actions and reality. There is a mismatch and this misalignment results in inner turmoil reflected in the form of stress. So, this misalignment is not moral failure, it is cognitive, existential and relational dissonance. When action is driven primarily by outcomes, success, recognition, validation, without clarity of purpose, it creates a fragile structure of motivation. You do not know why are you doing something. The people who work day and night to accumulate as much wealth as they can, but after some time they realize that they do not have enough purpose to accumulate this much of wealth. So, accumulating wealth without any definitive purpose or goal becomes a cause of stress for them, because they after some time they do not have that much of motivation left for that. Effort becomes instrumental, not meaningful. You keep on doing the same thing again and again without really asking yourself, why are you doing? Identity becomes tied to results, uncertainty becomes threatening. So, after some time, you become your image, you become your expectations. You do not want to work for something because it does not come from within. You have lost your interest in that, but you continue doing that. Why? Because the world wants you to do that, the society wants you to do that. So, just to safeguard your image, your status, you keep on doing that. In texts like the Bhagavad Gita, this is framed as phala sakti, attachment to results. You always do something with an intent to get the result. It does not give you happiness in the real sense. In Indian knowledge system, stress is not understood as a temporary reaction to external situations, but as a structural condition of consciousness shaped by the kleśas, deep rooted psychological afflictions. So, this is there in your personality, in your mind, in your thought. It is not caused by external forces, it is coming from your own dissatisfaction or misalignment. At the foundation lies avidyā, that is misapprehension of reality. You do not understand what is reality, where one mistakes the impermanent for permanent and the external for the self. So, you do not realize that the stress lies within and you search for its causes in things around you. This distorted understanding gives rise to what we call asmitā, that is ego identification, where identity becomes fused with roles, achievements and perceptions. As I said, you no longer really feel from within to work for something, but you keep on doing that to safeguard your reputation, to perform a particular role. In the organizations also, we find lot of people keep on doing whatever is assigned to them without really enjoying it, acting because they have been given a deadline, acting because they have been promised a pay raise. As a result, life is no longer experienced objectively, but personally, and every situation begins to carry psychological weight, and it puts added pressure on your mind. From this misidentification emerges rāga, that is attachment, and dveṣa, that is aversion, which regulate how experience is filtered. This rāga dveṣa is what causes lot of problems. Attachment creates a dependence on specific outcomes. You will not exist unless you achieve something. Well, narrowing what is acceptable and turning uncertainty into anxiety. And that feeling of failure in achieving that causes lot of stress. Aversion, on the other hand, generates resistance to discomfort, failure or loss, intensifying distress by opposing what cannot always be avoided. You do not want to be unsuccessful, you do not want to be proved inefficient. As a result, you develop aversion towards failure, discomfort or loss. You do not want to lose, and for that you make efforts that are taxing to your body, mind and alignment between your body and mind and causes stress. Together, rāga, dveṣa, they create a rigid mental framework in which the mind is constantly pulled between craving and avoidance, craving for more success and avoiding failure, and this makes equilibrium difficult. You are not able to maintain the balance of your mind, you are not able to balance between work and rest. Stress in this sense is not caused by events themselves, but by the restricted range of experiences the mind is willing to accept. When you become prone to accepting success, but not accepting any failure, stress is natural. Underlying and sustaining this entire structure is what is called abhiniveśa, deep seated fear and clinging. The persistent anxiety around loss, change and uncertainty. Since you fear failure, it puts stress on you. You always try to run against time to become successful. It manifests as a need for control and continuity even in a world defined by impermanence. So, these 5 kleśas do not operate in isolation, but as an interconnected system. What are these 5 kleśas? Misperception leads to ego identification. That means you become the role, your real self is identified by the role which is initially impermanent and that you assume it to be permanent. So, misperception leads to ego identification, which generates attachment and aversion, rāga and dveṣa, all of which are reinforced by fear. So, these 5 kleśas, misperception, ego identification, attachment, aversion and fear, they are the doorways to stress. Consequently, stress persists not because situations remain difficult, but because the internal structures generating stress remain unexamined. You are not able to control them. If you can control them, probably the root cause of stress will be identified and addressed. So, stress in Indian thought does not arise from a single source, but from a dynamic interplay of emotional, ethical, social and existential tensions within the individual. So, where external events act merely as triggers rather than ultimate causes. You are emotionally disturbed, you are ethically fractured, you are under the weight of social expectations and you are beset with existential tensions, when you are torn between different kinds of appetencies or desires, the outside world just triggers that further, but you believe that the outside causes are the ultimate causes. At the emotional level, stress emerges through attachment, grief, anger, fear and insecurity, not as isolated feelings, but as intensified responses rooted in dependency and identification. So, this becomes part of our character. If we are emotionally vulnerable, if we have trust issues, fine, that makes us insecure, and as a result, we look for triggers outside. The longing of Sita in Ashok Vatika, the grief of Ram, or the humiliation and rage of Draupadi are not simply emotional states. They reveal how deeply the self becomes entangled with relationships, expectations and loss. So, even such figures are not completely immune to these feelings. At the ethical level, stress is generated through conflicts of dharma, where competing obligations resist easy resolution. Well, in the case of Yudhishthir, the tension is not between right and wrong, but between multiple forms of rightness, exposing the inherent ambiguity within moral frameworks. So, he was doing the right thing, but then the right also had multiple forms. So, which right is the right for that particular moment? Fine. So, his tension arises not because he is taking the path of adharma, but then the several forms of dharmas are competing with each other, whether he should abide by the pati dharma or bhratri dharma or raj dharma. Fine. So, in that Sabha Parv we find that he is under stress because of this ethical conflict or ethical tension. The challenge is the modern assumption that clarity eliminates stress. So, so looking at the situation of Yudhishthir, we can easily find out that clarity eliminates stress. No, instead Indian thought suggests that even ethical awareness can deepen stress when action must proceed in conditions of uncertainty. You have to choose between the rights. There are several right things that you can do simultaneously, but you have to choose one. So, even if clarity is there in your mind, the residue remains in the sense you could have taken other rights as well. This complexity intensifies at the level of identity, where the individual is caught between an inner sense of self and externally imposed roles. Many a times, friends, you think about yourself. You are playing a role in your office. When you come back home, you take out all your clothes, change it to your daily clothes, and you feel much relieved, and at times you are amazed, am I the same person who was giving that presentation in the office? I was so different. Fine. So, we are always caught between an inner sense of self, which is our real self, that office self or the home self. The thing is, we have a self which is beyond all these roles, temporary roles, and that is our real self. That is what we have always wanted to be. So, figures like Ram illustrate how role based expectations, son, king, moral exemplar, can produce a structural strain, as a self is required to sustain multiple often conflicting ideals simultaneously. As a son you have to behave differently, as a king you have to behave differently, as a Maryada Purushottam you have to keep up the moral order. So, stress in this sense is not merely psychological, but ontological, existential, arising from the fragmentation or over extension of identity. The question, who am I, becomes inseparable from what must I be for others. Fine. So, socially stress is shaped by systems of comparison, competition, hierarchy and honor, which relocate the center of the self outside itself. We have earlier also discussed it, how we do not identify ourselves in the true sense of the self, but always look for references outside ourselves. So, we look at ourselves in comparison to others, whether we are well off or we are below them, through competitions, whether we are winning or losing, through the hierarchy, whether we are on top of the hierarchy or at the bottom, and through so many things that are outside ourselves. When worth is determined through recognition, reputation or relative standing, the individual becomes dependent on unstable external markers. This produces a condition of perpetual evaluation, where the self is never secure, but constantly negotiated. So, you are in position of power and you are always under stress. If the power goes, people will not salute me. Why? Because your real self has never negotiated with people, it has never come out. If your real self is good and you are respected for your real self, maybe people will believe that these roles come and go, but the person is good and they will continue to respect you. Stress therefore is not only internal disturbance, but also a socially mediated phenomenon. As I said, it is not completely wrong to assume that the external factors cause stress, but then that is not the only reason. I can give you a very simple example. Sometimes you might have seen that you are trying to set bundle of threads right, and these threads are entangled, and that requires lot of attention and concentration on your part. If your mind is concentrated and if it is aligned from within, you do that Herculean task. But if you yourself are disturbed from within, you further complicate it. So, rather than solving it, you make it more complex and jumbled. This itself shows that external and internal both are important, but yes, external is the manifestation of the internal self. Finally, some of the most enduring forms of stress are self imposed, arising from rigid vows, uncompromising ideals and perfectionist tendencies. Lot of us impose lot of restrictions on ourselves, and that causes lot of stress. We never allow our body and mind to be free to do whatever it wishes to do in certain circumstances, and this self imposition also causes stress. There are people with perfectionist attitude, they want everything to be in order, but then naturally everything cannot be ordered in all the time. So, these little disturbances will cause stress for them. The life of Bhisma demonstrates how commitments once internalized as absolute can transform into inescapable psychological burdens. This reveals a critical insight: discipline and idealism, when inflexible, can become sources of suffering rather than liberation. So, there are people who impose discipline on themselves and they believe that they are absolute, and as a result they face stress. So, in Indian thought, stress is never confined to the mind. It is understood as a systemic disturbance that progressively permeates cognition, emotion, behavior, the body and ethical judgment. So, what begins as internal agitation gradually reorganizes the entire field of experience. At the cognitive level, stress results in a breakdown of discrimination, buddhi, the faculty of discernment loses clarity, leading to what is often described as buddhinasa, that is collapse of judgment. So, there are failures at all levels, cognitive level, there is nas or collapse of buddhi, your ability to discern, your ability to really find out truth from untruth, or as cognition destabilizes, emotional life becomes correspondingly distorted. Anger, grief, anxiety and confusion intensify not simply as reactions, but as amplified states shaped by misperception and over identification. So, when your buddhi is not working properly, this also affects your emotion, your bhava, and emotions lose proportion and begin to dominate awareness. So, distorted emotion leads to disturbance rather than constructive action. These internal disturbances inevitably manifest at the behavioral level. Actions become impulsive, reactive or avoidant. Individuals may oscillate between aggression and withdrawal, neither of which resolves the underlying condition. So, when we look at stress from this perspective, we find that the roots of stress lie in our inner thought, but then there is a chain and there is a chain reaction. I mean, cognition leads to emotional breakdown, which in turn leads to aggressive impulsive behavior of aggression or withdrawal, and so on and so forth. So, behavior in this sense becomes an outward expression of inner disorganization rather than conscious choice. Indian medical traditions such as Ayurveda extend this analysis further by recognizing that sustained psychological imbalance disrupts physiological equilibrium. And since mind is the controlling unit, if the mind is disturbed, it also affects our physiology. Stress aggravates dosic imbalance. What is that? Particularly Vata, Pitta, Dosa. We always talk about Vata, Pitta and Kapha, three dosas. So, Vata is associated with movement, instability and anxiety, and Pitta is linked to heat, irritation and anger. So, demonstrating that mental disturbance is inseparable from bodily dysregulation. Thus, stress is not just in the head, but it is embodied. It manifests in our bodily behavior, in our physiology as well. So, perhaps most significantly, Indian texts emphasize the ethical consequences of stress. When cognition is clouded and emotions are unstable, action loses its grounding in dharma. We do not really take dharma in all our actions, we suppress it or we surpass it. So, decisions become short-sighted, self-protective or reactive, leading to adharmic conduct, not necessarily out of intent, but out of diminished clarity and control. So, finally, stress therefore is not only a psychological or medical concern, but an ethical one as well, because it erodes the very capacity to act rightly. Taken together, these dimensions reveal that stress operates as a cascade effect, moving from subtle cognitive disturbance to emotional distortion, behavioral disruption, physiological imbalance and finally ethical breakdown. So, as I said, it has a rippling effect or cascading effect. You know, one kind of disturbance leads to a series of disruptions causing stress. It is interconnected degradation that makes stress in the Indian perspective a profound condition requiring not surface level management, but deep reordering of awareness, perception and way of living. So, friends, just removing the external layer or external cause of stress will certainly not help us overcome our stresses. So, stress when viewed through Indian knowledge system is not simply a byproduct of a demanding world, it is a symptom of deeper misalignment within the self. To treat it merely as pressure, workload or emotional strain is to remain at the surface. As I said, what the preceding analysis reveals is more unsettling. Stress persists not because life is inherently overwhelming, but because our ways of perceiving, identifying and engaging with life are structurally unstable. Across its causes and consequences, a pattern emerges. What is that pattern? The mind misperceives reality, over identifies with roles, attaches to outcomes, resists discomfort and seeks permanence in what is inherently changing. These are not occasional errors, they are habitual orientations of consciousness. Stress therefore is not an interruption of normal life, it is often the outcome of what we consider normal living. So, this leads to a critical inversion. The question is not how to reduce stress while continuing the same patterns, but whether those very patterns, constant comparison, outcome dependence, unexamined ambition and lack of self awareness are themselves the source of the conditions we are trying to escape. So, Indian thought demands a more radical shift from control to understanding, from reaction to awareness, from external validation to inner clarity, from fragmented identity to integrated being. In this sense, stress is not merely a problem to be managed, it is a diagnostic force. It exposes the fractures between what we pursue and why we pursue, what we are and what we believe ourselves to be, how we live and how life actually unfolds. So, these are some of the questions to ponder over and they will certainly help us develop better understanding of stress. So, thank you very much friends. In the next class, we will continue our discussion further. Thank you very much.